Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Churchville, the host of the Warwick's and San Diego Writers Festival Book Club. And on behalf of our partners at Warwick's and everyone else at the festival, I'd like to welcome you to our 15th book club meeting, featuring a conversation with our very own Tracy J. Jones and Kyo Maclear, author of Unearthing, a story of tangled love and family secrets. I can't wait to talk about it. We want to thank you for being here, whether you're participating on Zoom, watching on Facebook Live, or viewing a recording of this event at a later date. There will be time for Q&A, so please feel free to drop any questions you might have for us in the Zoom chat or the Facebook comments, and we'll get to as many as we can. Please stick around after our discussion because we've got a lot of fun announcements. We are always happy to have Julie Slavinsky from Warwick's with us. We are so thankful for them sponsoring this book club, and especially Julie, who is always recommending such interesting books.
Yay. Well, thank you. This has been, I can't believe it's 15.
I know.
That's amazing. Kyo, thank you for coming in.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, so great. The book was just released, I think, in August, so it's fresh off the presses. So we're so happy you're here. We've got some great events coming up at Warwick's. Check our website for some things. Michael Connolly's going down to Coronado in November. So got some really good things happening still this fall. And we're looking forward to the Shaking the Tree event in December too. So that's it for me. Thanks, ladies.
Awesome. So now I'd like to officially introduce our book club interviewer, Tracy J. Jones. Tracy is a professional content writer, editor, and writing coach. She co-runs the San Diego Memoir Showcase and co-edits the Showcase anthology, Shaking the Tree, Brazen Short Memoir. Tracy runs several read and critique groups, teaches at San Diego Writers, Inc., and is the president of the International Memoir Writers Association. Tracy's links are in the chat.
Thank you, Lisa and Julie, and a wave to Miss Leslie Ferguson, our IMWA marketing liaison person extraordinaire, for helping us out with tech today. I'm so excited and honored that we have Kyo with us today. Before we get started, this is a new book. It came out August 23rd, I believe, or 22nd. So it's still fresh, but we're going to do, because this is a book club for writers by writers, we're going to kind of dive into some of the actual events and some of the mystery. So if you've just bought your book or you're in the middle, you might want to pause and come back to this, because we want you to feel that you're free to ask Kyo anything about her writing process or questions about her beautiful memoir. So again, please buy your copy from Warwick's if you haven't yet, and just know that from this point forward, we're going to talk about all the aspects of this fantastic and moving memoir. Here's a little bit about Kyo. We're going to start with her bio. Kyo Maclear is an essayist, novelist, and children's author. She was born in London, England, and moved to Toronto at the age of 4 with her British father, a foreign correspondent and documentary filmmaker, and Japanese mother, a painter and art dealer. Her books have been translated into 15 languages, published in over 25 countries, and garnered nominations from the Hilary Weston Writers Trust Prize for Nonfiction, the Governor General's Literary Awards, the TD Canadian Children's Literature Awards, the Amazon Canada First Novel Award, the National Magazine Award, among other honors. Her hybrid memoir, which I am now dying to read, Birds, Art, Life, was a #1 national bestseller and winner of the Trillium Book Award and the Nautilus Book Award for lyrical prose, which we get a lot of in this book as well. Birds Art Life was named one of the best books of 2017 by the Globe, the Mail, CBC, Now Magazine, the National Post, Forbes, the Chicago Review of Books, and Book Riot. She holds a doctorate in environmental humanities and teaches creative writing with the Humber School of Writers and the University of, I'm not sure how to pronounce that word. Is it Guelph Creative Writing MFA?
It's close, Guelph.
Guelph, okay. And we've got her links in the chat with her website, Instagram, and again, a link to buy the book. If you're here with us and you are still going to go through and you haven't quite read this unforgettable memoir, let me just give you a little bit about it to refresh you too if you read it a little while ago, because we've been promoting this one for a couple of months. So 3 months after Kyo Maclear's father dies in December 2018, she gets the results of a DNA test showing that she and the father who raised her are not biologically related. Suddenly, Maclear becomes a detective in her own life, unraveling a family mystery piece by piece and assembling the story of her biological father. Along the way, larger questions arise. What exactly is kinship? And what does it mean to be a family? Unearthing is a captivating and propulsive story of inheritance that goes beyond heredity. Infused with moments of suspense, it is also a thoughtful reflection on race, lineage, and our cultural fixation on recreational genetics. You'll recognize, if you're readers of The Crying in H Mart, that she unflinching insights on grief and loyalty and keen perceptions of the relationship between especially mothers and daughters. So the questions are: what gets planned, what gets planted, what's get buried, what role does storytelling play in unearthing the past and making sense of a life? Can the humble act of tending a garden provide common ground for an inquisitive daughter and her complicated mother? As it seeks to answer these questions, Unearthing bursts with the very love it seeks to understand. We are so excited to have you here, Kyo. I have a lot of questions. I know we've got questions from the other, from Facebook, and we'll be able to check in with the people here on Zoom. But before we begin diving in, I would love you to share a reading from the book and let us know where you're reading from, please.
So I'll start by thanking Julie, Tracy, Leslie, and Lisa. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm here from Toronto, Canada.
So welcome to the San Diego Writers Festival Book Club. We are here with Kyo Maclear, and she's about to read a portion from her lovely memoir, Unearthing, a story of tangled love and family secrets. So please do share a reading with us.
So this is from a chapter called Circle. When my father died and I was his daughter at work and at rest, I traveled alone to a residency in the mountains. The results of my DNA test appeared in my inbox as I sat alone in a room 4,500 feet above sea level. What I saw was a circle bisected into two halves. I had inherited half of each parent's DNA, but the Jewish paternal half bore no resemblance to my father's genetic history, at least as it had been told to me. An error, I thought, a glitch. I casually refreshed the page several times, tapping my cursor as though it were the spin button of a slot machine, and the reels of cherries, bars, and lemons might, through repeat attempts, align in a different pattern. The page did not realign. I texted a screenshot to my husband, my Jewish husband. A mistake, he replied. A minute passed. You don't even like herring, he added. A few minutes later, he texted again. Mazel tov, now you know what that means. Alongside my DNA results, the company provided migratory maps of my ancestors, which showed my paternal family originating from Lithuania, Latvia, and Belarus. I'd never heard my family speak of any of these countries. Near the end of my father's life, I befriended a neuroscientist who told me a story of his nephews traveling on a plane for the first time. My friend was seated a few rows ahead of them. Shortly after takeoff, the plane was hit by severe turbulence, which rocked the cabin and sent belongings flying everywhere. Passengers were screaming, worried for his nephews who were surely experiencing the same stomach plummeting terror. My friend looked back to find them with arms raised, cheerfully shrieking, "Roller coaster!" I was struck by this story, by his nephew's joyful bubble, and by their ability to experience upheaval as adventure. Was it the joy of young children tossed into the air, knowing there would be waiting arms and rescue? Was it the effervescence of those who do not possess crash data? In the early spring of 2019, I found myself thrown clean from the seat of my old story. There was a feeling of falling.
Beautiful. There's so many questions to ask about this, but as a writer, I wanted to talk about the prologue, like the start, because you kind of give away a lot right away. So I wondered about the thought on that, because we know that you found out your father is not who you raised you is not your biological father. We get a little bit about your relationship with your mother and how you're going to use her second language, gardening. So I found it really grounding and I liked it, but I thought, I was like, wow, she's kind of giving us a lot right away, which I liked. So I just wanted to kind of know about the start of the book, which is what we spend so much time rewriting those first 10 pages over and over again. Can you tell me a little bit about your thoughts about the start?
Oh, wow. No one's ever asked me that before, but I think, I mean, in some ways, I don't know if you feel this way with the beginnings of the things that you write, but sometimes they can be a little overwritten. So I found that I actually wrote that fairly quickly and then didn't really touch it much, and then kind of went back and revised it lightly. But I kind of felt like there was so much that was kind of, that would remain a mystery as we begin the book, that I wanted to establish certain things quickly. And, and so I kind of wanted to kind of lay out the facts, of what had happened, without disclosing all the details. I mean, this story has kind of three kind of braids to it, I guess, or three different threads to it. And one of them is definitely the genetic mystery. And I don't think I kind of reveal the exact nature of the genetic mystery, but I want to establish that early on. And I also want to establish the mother-daughter relationship, which is another thread. And then I guess the third thread being the kind of garden kind of narrative, which is, as you said, like it became a kind of way of communicating with my mother beyond her first language, which was Japanese.
And you talk about how Unearthing, it folds out in sections. And it's the Japanese, how do you say it? It's Sekki?
Yeah, so Seki, it's like these, what they're called small seasons. So in Japan, there's instead of having 4 like kind of larger seasons, there's what's called 24 small seasons. And even within those seasons, there are micro seasons. So there's like, I think 72 micro seasons. And I was just really interested in this idea of like these kind of micro shifts in climate and weather and kind of the ground, that we don't really notice when we work within these large units of like summer, spring, fall, winter. Because part of the story was really about how the ground underneath our feet shifts kind of so slightly and so imperceptibly at times, but kind of dramatically at the same time. And so I also wanted to kind of recalibrate the way I was noticing things, because one thing that's kind of revealed in the story is that I kind of saw my mother for a lot of my life as the backdrop. I mean, I think honestly, like I think women, mothers, we tend to be the kind of omnipresent,
always there,
backdrop, whatever, we're there. There's a kind of ambient feeling to mothers, and whereas my father was like this big protagonist, like he was a war reporter, he was a globetrotter. And I always saw him as having this kind of big protagonist energy. And so in some ways, my mother was, and a lot of her friends, they were kind of what would be called the scenery to my life. And I really wanted to kind of start paying attention to the scenery because, as was revealed by my DNA test, it turned out my mother had a fairly large story.
Fairly large, yes.
Yeah.
We're still questioning things, which is,
Yeah.
I think, really interesting about this. So unlike sort of a traditional DNA mystery, it's there, but it's really more about this mix of the understanding the DNA part is compelling, but it's just as compelling to figure out your mother and to learn about, for me, gardening. That was something that my mother did and my grandmother did that just skipped me. I didn't ever think about doing that. So can you tell me a little bit, did you always know that you were going to use the seasons as the kind of the guidepost to let you pick your chapters, or is that something that came later to you?
The seasons definitely came later. I don't think I had that idea originally, but the planting, like that was just what was happening in my life at the time, because my mother, I mean, this story takes place in the kind of concentrated period of time I spend taking care of my mother through a cancer diagnosis and then a diagnosis of dementia, which, in terms of the story, casts her kind of ever-shifting memories in a new light. But one of the things that quickly became apparent to me was that I wasn't going to get all the answers by kind of going in as this interrogator. My mother, even at the best of times before the dementia, was never a, dutiful subject. She was never, a reliable raconteur. I mean, my friend describes her as having different drummer protocols. Like she just had her own drum, went by her own beat. I felt like sometimes I had this feeling of being like, Wile E. Coyote, and she was like the roadrunner. Every time I try to like kind of pin her down and pin her story down, she'd like dash away. And so it became quickly apparent that part of the reason for this was her kind of the kind of onset of dementia. And so I realized that I needed to figure out a way to communicate with my mother beyond these kind of interrogations of like what happened, who was my father, and so forth. And so the planting and the garden became a way of meeting her on her own terms and territory, and a way of kind of like going at conversations in a more like, I guess, slant, like kind of in a more elliptical way, in a way that didn't feel threatening to her. And also to learn something from her, because I really realized like I was losing my mother gradually, and I wanted to kind of understand her better. And she was always an incredible gardener, and I kind of overlooked that. I mean, I'm like a really bad gardener. Like I still don't have a green thumb, but I realized that I needed to kind of learn some patience. And actually, the one thing you learn from gardening is patience. And also, it's almost the opposite of a storyteller's mindset, because with a storyteller mindset, you have to kind of feel like you're in control. Whereas certainly with the garden, like with kind of shifts of season that are unpredictable or whatever, you have to kind of cede control and surrender to certain things. And that really became the kind of modus operandi for my relationship with my mother and the story as it was unfolding.
So you end up, the story has lots of ups and downs, and, there's changes in personalities and figuring out things, but you write about, it's not just your own story. You have other people that were really involved and close to you. So we have, as people that help people with, early drafts of memoirs, it's hard for them to find that balance of like sharing their life, but not sharing too much of other people's lives. So I wondered how you worked on that balance of, I saw a lot of the names of characters were just initials, and a lot of times there weren't a lot of descriptions where you could find stuff in between. So wanted to know a little bit about, we always worry about, hurting those people. Was it easier to write once your mother had passed? Did the writing change for you? Or was it something that you always knew that you did want to keep a certain privacy while also opening the readers up to you so that we bond and love you as we did?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a big thing. Like, I do think that like life writing is a tricky thing. Like, I think we examine our lives and we kind of throw light on to these things, these kind of so-called private aspects of our life, hoping that in doing so, we can kind of illuminate other people's stories as well. And that kind of readers will find some source of connection. Like, I kind of think of it as like, when you go to the airport and you see that travel like guide or the tour guide with the little flag, the little pennant that they're holding on a large stick. Like, I kind of think of the memoirist as that person who's like kind of saying, we're going to be going on this journey together. And everyone who wants to stand under this flag, everyone who's had a DNA surprise, come over here and follow me, and I'll share what I've discovered. But no story is, the coastlines of anyone's story are never that tidy. Like our stories spill into other people's stories. And so there's always the question of ethics. Somebody said recently to me, I was at a festival and they said, did you have any blowback? Or like they were asking all the memoirists in the panel, was there blowback? And, I teach memoir writing, I teach creative nonfiction. And one thing I tell my students is, I think, Vivian Gornick, who was she's still around, she wrote a famous memoir called Fierce Attachments. She said that the only duty of the writer is to serve the story. And I think that's a kind of cold-blooded way of looking at it. I do think that there's something cold-blooded about writing about people generally. Like, I think we have to be honest. But I think that within that, we can be, we talk to my students and I talk about making kind of love the ground of writing, like having a sense of like that your mission is to humanize people. It's to uplift people. It's not to settle scores. It's not to kind of deify people, but it's also not to vilify people. And so really what I'm trying to do in this book is to give people a sense of three-dimensionality, to try to get under the skin of decisions they made, sometimes bad decisions, bad choices, but I'm not there to like cast judgment. And I actually really did begin to really understand the motivation behind my parents keeping the secret for so long. And that, I think is like the job of the writer is not to kind of stop at this like two-dimensional portrayal. And then again, like at the same time, I had to realize that I was sharing facts that my parents wanted to keep hidden for a long time. And I had to deal with that. Like I had to deal with what that meant. But I also feel like secrets are created under pressure. And a lot of the social pressures they experienced in the 60s and 70s don't exist in the same way. Like the idea around infidelity being like this huge taboo, or like divorce, or a lot of it, like the idea of keeping a secret was almost a hangover. And so when people would say to me, like, you're not going to write about this, occasionally I wouldn't. And occasionally I push back because at a certain point, like I felt like it was my story and like my identity had been kind of vandalized by this mistruth. Right. And I felt like I had to kind of establish what was kind of, I don't know, it felt like a form of narrative repair. Like I had this story, this cover story that I'd been told about who I was and who my family was. It fell down, and I tried to kind of piece together a new story. And I really needed to do that delicately, but I also had to kind of see where it was my right to do that too.
Just a side note, I was adopted like when I was 6 weeks old, and my parents told me around 9. And I remember the feeling then at 9 being like, you suckers have been lying to me. Like, my brother was in on this. You two guys knew this. Like, I'm the last one. Like, did the cats know? So, and it rocked my world at 9, even in the best adoption kind of story there can be. So I want to feel like being a full adult and having children already, to find this kind of mystery and this like, wait, you guys were lying my whole life? How does that as an adult? Because I know my 9-year-old me is still grappling with that at times. So I'm wondering how your adult you has handled that, or is handling that with the book tour as well.
Yeah, that's a really good, to be honest, like, I don't know that I fully metabolized how I feel. Like, I know that seems strange because I've written a book, but I think that the feelings continue past the point of like handing in your manuscript. That's the thing about life writing. It's not like the characters get packed away as they do with fiction. The characters are still evolving. You're still evolving. So my feelings have continued to evolve. I mean, I do have a little sadness in that I discovered it too late to actually meet my biological father. I grew up as an only child. I discovered I had 5 half siblings, and I had lost the chance to meet like at least one of them. And so there's a little sadness around that. But, I also feel a sadness that my dad in particular didn't feel like he could tell me the truth. And he went, like, he's died now. And I never had a chance to say, like, I would have loved you no matter what. It wouldn't have made it like even an ounce of difference if I'd known that you weren't my biological father. Because I honestly think that he thought that the idea was so threatening that he thought if I knew, I would somehow reject him in a certain way. And, in the book, it's kind of revealed that he has this whole backstory that kind of motivated him to keep the secret. So I do think it's just so complicated. And I still have conversations in my head like about this with my parents. And, it's interesting that you learned when you were 9, because I often I kind of speculate in the book, like they could have told me at this age, or they could have
I
told
had that same thing.
me.
I'm the early age one. Like, why didn't you get told then? And there is a sense, but not like you can ask them about it, but it's still always such a strange feeling finding out anyways. So a little bit about like, the white box comes in, the ancestry DNA, and your friend's like, oh, take a DNA test. That'll be interesting. And it's Pandora's box. Like, do you want to know? Do you wish you didn't know? And I heard in an interview that you called customer support, or you ordered a second test, like you didn't believe it. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, first of all, I didn't do the test because I had any doubts about who my parents were. I was doing it to try to figure out something more about my paternal grandmother, because I knew nothing about that side. And I was just hoping to connect with some family members on my Irish side, which it turns out I don't have an Irish side. But anyway.
The last name follows.
Yeah. So I did the test. And I do think that the reason, like, I think the recreational genealogy, like the recreational part, we forget that part of it. But people do it, I think, as a form of entertainment. We do it because we want to connect with family members we don't know, or find out, what our origins are. But I think most of us do it with a sense of kind of at least a slight psychological and emotional remove. I think, we do it, as a lark, right? And so, I was completely shocked. And so I really was doubtful about the results. It just didn't make sense. It didn't kind of add up. And so I did a second test. And then I uploaded the results of both tests to a third site, which means that every day I get like cousin or like relative alerts in my inbox. I have so many like little pings in my inbox telling me that I have a new relative.
Yeah, I get the same, but they're all 4th or 5th cousins. But I'm still I'm like, okay, let's get a little bit higher up the tree. Get me a little more excited. I absolutely. I wanted to talk a little bit about finding out about your Jewish heritage, and also the fact that your husband is Jewish. And you couldn't get married at the temple because you didn't convert, but that he culturally, like, you celebrated, you do things in the house, you have the Sukkot and that sort of thing. So I wanted to know, like, did that resonate in some sense of you like picking this partner that was how he was, or did it make any new change to how you felt about anything? I'm still kind of grappling with that. I
I mean, I grew up mostly in Jewish neighborhoods in Toronto. It was like, I don't know, I kind of wonder in the book, like about why my mother was always seeking out Jewish families. Um, and I ended up marrying a Jewish man. He was studying to be a cantor, and he wasn't allowed to become a cantor unless I converted, which I didn't. But we do have a secular Jewish home, and I grew up with all the traditions. So in some ways, it wasn't like a huge paradigm shift for me, discovering that I was half Jewish. Do I have a sense? I have a sense of a lot of curiosity about my ancestors, and I do have, I have to say, it's not a biological yearning to know more, but a real kind of historical desire to learn more about them. And just kind of feeling connected to that, maybe a little bit more, kind of it rings differently inside of me. But, we raised our children Jewish as well, so there wasn't a big shift.
In terms of your mother is not a reliable narrator, and we don't know. And I guess the question is, was she always unreliable, or was it the dementia that was starting? Like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? But it was so frustrating at times as the reader, because you're like, come on, but you could just tell by a look she gave you, or that she wouldn't look at you, that it wasn't the right time. Did you find that the breast cancer, as hard as that was, that did give you some time to try and figure stuff out and learn the non-bullying way to deal with your mother in terms of getting information? Was that a weird sort of gift, that time that you had to spend taking her to treatments every day, that sort of thing?
It really was. I mean, it's a weird thing to call it a gift, but the kind of time, the concentrated time I spent caregiving allowed us to be kind of shoulder to shoulder, in a way that wasn't face to face. I find, even with my sons, I find we have our best conversations when we're walking shoulder to shoulder, or even on long drives. There's just something that's a little less interrogative than being face to face. My mother has always been suspicious of questions. She's always been kind of weirdly candid about certain things, but also extremely private. So she's a bit of a contradiction in that way. But I actually wrote a piece recently about the idea of privacy, because I realized at a certain point, there's so much that's transparent in our world now. We disclose so much, memoir is such a popular genre, social media, we're always sharing at this kind of minute scale. And so I kind of came around, at first when I found out what had happened, I was very almost evangelical about needing honesty. I was like, are you lying to me? Is that a secret? I couldn't handle anything that felt clandestine. But now I'm kind of back to my old ways of really valuing the idea of the fact that we have a right to keep certain things private. That my secret is also my mother's private thing. And she had a relationship with a man, and for whatever reason, didn't want to tell me everything. At a certain point, I had this weird feeling that my questions had actually triggered her dementia, which is completely irrational. But I had this feeling that I had almost caused her to shelter in forgetting, that I'd raised these kind of ghosts of the past that she couldn't deal with. And so she kind of disassociated with storylines because she didn't want to remember for whatever reason. And I will never really know everything. And that's just a fact. But how much does anyone really know about their mother's inner lives, right? Or life before they were born, or, as much as we know our mothers, it's hard to know, right?
Hard to know. And we work sometimes with people and we're just they're doing just a family history. And I would give anything to know what my great grandparents ate for breakfast when they were growing up. Simple, stupid things that people are it's not worth time writing this down for the family. I'm oh my gosh, it's so worth the time. I also felt that your book really, it's almost, I guess, complex grief, because you had the grief of losing your father, and then the DNA test, and then your mom gets breast cancer, and then the dementia, and it's a 2-year container. And so I feel grief was you didn't really get a chance to grieve your father before you found out this biological DNA twist. So tell me a little bit about, I also liked the Jewish customs that you brought in about lighting the candle and going to the cemeteries and leaving stones. So do you want to tell me a little bit about grief and how it played a role in this book?
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that I think the grief actually started before my dad passed away, because he had dementia. And so it was a long period, and then we headed into COVID. So I feel like I'm just starting to kind of resurface in some ways. The one thing I kind of want to make clear in the book is that I actually think that grief softened me in a good way. Like, I think that in some ways grief, I mean, you were saying, was a breast cancer a gift? Like, yes and no. Like, how could cancer ever be a gift? But I think what happens when you're ill or when you're grieving is that you become more permeable. And so you kind of become more porous to other people's feelings as well. And it's really a beautiful way of connecting with people. Like, I found even in writing this book that I've connected with people in this beautiful way. Readers have come to me and written to me, and there's just something really lovely about that. Because as much as as common as grief is, like, we all have a mother, we all have a father, and whether they're living or not, like, we will lose them, right? It's so common, and yet I feel like there's almost a taboo around speaking about grief, or there's a kind of timeline to how long you're allowed to speak about grief. And so I think that, we have to remember that our superpower is the fact that we can be permeable, and that we can dissolve, and we can be soft, and we can grieve, and that these feelings are actually incredibly important and humanizing, and that everything goes wrong when we become hard and fortified and kind of armored. And so I think that's really been the kind of lesson. It's also a lesson of the garden. Like, if you ask any gardener or botanist, they'll tell you that in the natural world, permeability is what kind of makes sense in the cosmos. If you're a hard plant, you're not going to survive. So you have to be supple.
Absolutely. And then I wanted to know, I thought this was so beautifully done. In the beginning of the book, you set up, when I was still my father's daughter, when I was still my father's daughter and he left the planet, when my father was dead and I was still his daughter. And you kind of carry that through those chapters. And then at the end, you do it with your mom, when my mother started forgetting and I was her daughter. Was the book ending of that always that way? Because it was for me, I got really misty-eyed when I saw you writing it about your mother the same way that you had about your father. And so it kind of gave me, it just brought the book together in a beautiful, beautiful way.
Yeah, I really love the idea. I write for children as well. And I like the idea of a refrain. Like, a refrain for me tells you that something's recurring and repeating. But it was also an attempt for me to ground myself in these relationships, because the ground was so slippery. It was so uneven. I'd lost my dad, and then I was losing my mom, and just repeating and when I was your daughter was a way of kind of reminding myself of that relationship, even as it was changing. There's just something weird when as you're losing your parents. I think that I began to feel like I was almost like a lighthouse keeper on an island where no one lived anymore. I was this holder of all these memories, partly also because both my parents, experienced dementia, that all their memories were kind of fleeing, and that I was the only one left to record things. And so, I'm not just their daughter, I'm their recording daughter, I'm their remembering daughter. So
I liked the when you get to the part where you go to the National Health Services and they say all of the mother's paperwork is missing or destroyed. Many adoptees run into this over and over and over again. So how did you keep up the searching? How did you keep the want to do when you think, well, all avenues leading to my mom, I can't get any answers that way? Can you tell me a little bit about kind of that feeling when you found out that was a closed door to you?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, one thing that is still so strange in hindsight is that I had to enlist, I enlisted a DNA detective, or kind of what's called
I want to talk about the angel. Angel. Yeah.
And to solve a mystery, to crack a mystery that could have been solved by somebody I see almost every day, like my mother, right?
Right.
But I went on to Facebook is good for things, right? So I joined a group called, I think it's called DNA Surprise something, or anyway, whatever it was called. And within an hour, I had somebody volunteer to be in my search angel. And she accompanied me for the next 6 months through this kind of genealogical research, and did it entirely for free. These people do this because they're so committed to helping people kind of meet their biological family, and also just using the tools they have as genealogists to help others. It's incredible.
I really liked this page on 92, which was what was he like? And, it's what you kind of know, but you don't really know. And so, it ends with he hated having his photos taken and didn't like to talk about the past, not at all. So I was wondering, like, what was he like? It's kind of this list, but you don't really know anything about the person from this list. It reminds me of like going to the eulogy, and when it sort of feels like a resume versus the person that comes up and tells a story, and we all kind of get that. So I liked, the British racing and like, had it with the ladies, like he sounds like this great character, but it doesn't tell us a lot.
No. Yeah, that's all I have, really.
That's it. It hasn't grown much from then.
I've had little anecdotes. I think that I've just kind of made peace with the fact that this person is going to be a stranger.
That's hard to make peace with, but it's something you kind of have to do. You talk about your mother's last garden, and also how her garden didn't, like in England, didn't follow kind of the British rules of how a garden should be, or anyone's rules, but the rules that she felt the plants were telling her and the earth was telling her. So can you kind of describe a little bit about like what that last garden that she had while she was still feeling well, what it was like to walk through it?
Well, it was, I guess they used the word shaggy. Like it was really shaggy. And also like there were a lot of like these weird prehistoric plants that I now know the names of, some of them, but like one of the things that she had a lot of was horsetail, which is like a very, like, it's a Jurassic plant. Like it's been around since the dinosaurs. And like, they just weren't the things that I saw other people growing. Like they weren't these kind of tidy ornamental flowers. A lot of them were shrubs. Like a lot of things stayed evergreen, but they weren't like beautiful necessarily in a classical sense. And they weren't very symmetrical. It was very artistic, but it was very different, and I grew up in like a mostly white neighborhood. And so like in lots of ways, like you want to kind of assimilate. And this was not a garden that was wanting to assimilate, but I think I make it clear also that my mother was not a person who wanted to assimilate.
No, absolutely not.
So like this kind of actually was very much in keeping with her character.
Lisa, welcome. Do you want to unmute? Join us. I know you've got a bunch of questions, so we're filling in for the audience right now.
Yes, there's so much that stood out for me, and especially as a person writing, and our audience are all people writing. It's a wonderful primer for show, don't tell. Your husband is all showing, not telling, and he is so solid through, and we get who he is. And I could see that in my husband with my mother. You would just put in, he shook his head, or he, kicked his leg under the thing. And it was enough to make him a character. And, the other parts, the one that hit me the most was, you were getting these little pieces from your mom. Oh, yeah, biological father met you. Oh, biological father didn't meet you, but knew about you. Oh, biological father didn't want you. And we've all as girls had those moments with our moms, and they're not flattering, but they're real. Mm-hmm. And so can you talk a little bit about, and that was enough. You just showed it. You didn't go on and narrate about it. So in these very tough points, as a writer, how much revision and stuff was going on to get it so concise like this without over explaining? Because it didn't need it, but I think most of us will just keep going.
Yeah, okay, so one thing I would say is that my drafts tend to be a little bit more verbose. Like they tend to be like a little bit more long-winded. And for sure, like I always put things like I need to write that, and then I can put it below the waterline. Like I really feel like I don't want to overstate things. Like one of the first things I learned as a writer was not to over amplify. Like if you make a point, and I do this in my first drafts all the time, like I'll make a point and then I'll make it again and I'll make it again and again and kind of restate it like 5 different ways. And so just kind of remembering that you don't need to do that. And also being generous and like toward the reader and not underestimating them, like giving them space to enter the story. And I think the only way to do that is to leave those little gaps, And I think that in some ways, like this is a lesson I learned from Charlie Brown and the Peanuts. Sometimes when you don't overdraw a character, we empathize with it more. We identify with it more. Like just having this kind of this squiggly, like, mouth, or like the 2 dots for the eyes, we can inhabit that character in a particular way because it's not overdrawn. It's not overly, it's specific in the things that, Charlie Brown thinks and does and says, but it's not calling too much attention to the kind of physicality of Charlie Brown. And I think that in some ways, like, I think that's true of some characters as well. Like when we're writing, that we don't need to overdraw them. And that especially like when I'm using the initial, and in Bird's Art Life, I don't even use initials. I just call people like the musician or the teacher. Like people will come to it with their own teacher in mind or their own musician in mind. And I really like doing that. Like I like opening it up to the reader. I think also this is a lesson I've learned from writing for kids is that, it's that old Strunk and White tip, which is to omit unnecessary words, like really kind of work towards concision. And that's just something that happens through revision.
Yeah. This part about being honest to the character and giving them the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, your mom was having dementia, but we can also, as daughters, think, was this part of the dementia, or did she keep changing her mind because she really was of a generation that didn't want to have to really spill the beans or say it? Can you talk about wrestling as the writer? Like everybody asks, how much do I put in? How do I not? Because by making her a whole person, I do feel compassionate towards her for sure. But part of that is giving the light and the dark.
Yeah.
Kind of how you got there.
Yeah, that's amazing. These are such great questions. Like I mean, for sure, like a lot of these, her kind of recalcitrants, like her kind of, I'm going to say it, like difficult personality at times, like these are all pre-dementia, like, and there's certain pre-dementia patterns in our relationship. In some ways, actually, that was, I mean, this is a sidebar, but like I saw a psychic at one point because I realized I had I felt really stuck in my relationship with my mother and things were changing in her behavior. And there was a kind of softening on her side, but I was still like feeling really armored when I was kind of relating to her. And I had to let that go if things were going to improve and change. But, I think that I just tried to kind of create a person that felt kind of flawed, but I'm also flawed in the book, and that's the only way I can say, like, I wanted to have everyone to have dignity, but also to be real. Like, I didn't want to kind of create characters that were kind of airbrushed. And I didn't want to sanitize the relationship we had because it is a prickly, like it's embattled, it's complicated. But it doesn't mean that it's not loving. I really think about this a lot because I think sometimes we can't see it represented. Like I worried one of my pre-publication worries was that she'd come off as a kind of like, as a really negative character, maybe like somewhat bordering on abusive or whatever. And that people with certain mothers might not see that the relationship we had love in it because it was more complicated. But I really think there is love there. It's just expressed very differently.
No, you did a great job with that, with her giving things to other people and the way other people saw her. Like you really did this amazing job of that. And that is the thing that I would strive to do for sure, as I'm working on one too, and it is complicated. And so
yeah.
What
I mean,
a
it's funny because
book to read to see how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've read Ocean Vuong's book. It was a novel, but like it started off as a memoir essay in the New Yorker. And I was reading somebody write about it, and they were referring to Ocean Vuong and his abusive mother. And it was so flattening of that relationship. And I thought, it's so sad because you try to create this really rich, complicated, layered portrayal, and then it can malfunction because somebody reads it and all they see is like abusive mother or something, and it completely reduces the actual amplitude of that relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't control how people read, but yeah.
Yeah, this is a great primer for how to really have balance in that show. Thank you. I love the book.
Oh,
I
thank
think
you.
the last question is what's it been like doing interviews and talking to readers? What's that experience been like now that it sort of takes a life of its own, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm about to interview a friend who has a memoir out about her sister's suicide, and she's like freaking out because it's like one thing to write a book and then to actually go out and be a promotional object and like talk about it. It's like a totally different set of skills. And I have to say, I'm so grateful for this conversation because it's been about craft as well. And I find sometimes when you're a woman and you're writing life about your life or doing any kind of life writing, in North America, at least, there's a tendency to forget about the craft part, that it is crafted and that we're kind of narrative beings and we're telling stories. And that it kind of becomes a more transparent conversation about like, how do you feel? And like, there's this feeling that people now have like complete access to all the inner workings of your life, when really you've shared a portion of it. And so the best conversations I've had have been ones like this one, where we talk about craft and memoir in the context of life writing. And I really love hearing about other people who are doing this kind of work. Like, I think it's an incredible thing to do. I really do. Like Amy Hempel once wrote, like, she likes to read so she can see how other people solve the problem of being alive, which sounds so negative, but like, I'm always curious about how people like live, how they grapple with difficult relationships, how they deal with things that are human, like grief. And so, yeah.
Well, Kyo, if you don't mind, we're just going to do some quick announcements here. This has been a beautiful conversation. We could talk to you forever, and I'm glad that we have this interview to share with our book club supporters. And it was just such a pleasure to speak with you. And I think it hit all of us in different ways. And I think that's the best thing about a book. It's very individualized. Lisa, any last thoughts before we do some quick announcements, you and I?
I just know that our memoir association, we have loads of people and they're just going to love hearing this interview because they're all in different positions in their memoir, some starting, some on their second and third draft. And there's just a lot here to help with that final crafting. So thank you.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you very much for your time. All right. We are going to do just a couple of quick announcements just to follow through. And
Julie is one of our partners from from Warwick's. There you are. Do you want to give us a little update on a few things coming up for Warwick's?
Like I said earlier in the beginning, we were talking about Michael Connelly coming to Coronado, which is a big one for us. We've got, next week we've got a really interesting one. Susan, oh, I'm going to mess up her name. Bonner, the soaps? Bonner soaps? Yes.
Oh,
so yes. The daughter's coming to the store. So I think it's going to be really fun. Really super interesting one. So, you know what? Look at our website. We've got just tons of things happening. And Kyo, thank you so much for doing this interview. It was absolutely amazing. One of the things that I took away is when we're daughters, we think of our mothers as only being people to us as a mother, but that they didn't have a life before us. Yeah. And kind of how I think of my kids, like they don't know anything about what I was doing prior to them. And so wrestling with all of that just it was a very enlightening. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
If you want to stay up to date on all the Memoir Showcase announcements and news from the International Memoir Writers Association, then sign up for our new monthly newsletter. We don't have a chat this time.
There's a Zoom chat. I think we can put it in the Zoom chat.
Oh, okay. I'll do that then. And while you're at it, why not sign up for the new San Diego Writers Festival monthly newsletter? The newsletter highlights writing events and organizations across San Diego and for all genres and all levels of writing. So be a part of the San Diego Writers Festival community all year round. And I'm going to put those links in the chat right now.
And we've got at the San Diego Writers Inc. With our festival co-founder Marnie Friedman and myself teaching Memoir 6 coming up at the end of the month. It's online. It's part of the certificate in memoir writing that the Writers Inc. Does, but you don't have any prerequisites. This is a great class because it's all about editing publishing, and like next steps. So you'll learn the art of editing your memoir, including identifying where and when to cut to streamline the plot. Students will also learn about the revision process, the different kinds of editors you can work with, and how to create a product that will hopefully excel in the marketplace and attract agents and traditional publishers or hybrids as well. So there's a link in there for joining the class. And again, it's the last one of the year, and it's just a really easy one to jump in. And if you haven't taken a class with Marnie Friedman, she's beyond amazing. So I'm glad to have that together. And our next International Memoir Writers Association meeting, they're always on the first Saturday of the month. So it's November 4th from 2:30 to 4. And we're so lucky. We've got festival co-founder Jennifer Thompson from Monkey See Media, who's also on the board of the IMWA. And the topic is website wow, the importance of having an author website. And she really tells you what you need to have as an author: a powerful website that tells a story, builds a loyal following, and sells books. So she'll talk internet marketing strategies. She's a brand consultant. She can teach the importance of your brand story and what's trending online, some search engine optimization tricks, SEOs, to try and drive your traffic. So she's a personal branding expert and the host of the Premise podcast. That's a part of the Writers Festival with Warwick's as well. And in the link, there'll be info for going to our November meeting. You can renew or join your membership, or if you're not sure, you can write to me at thepresident@sdmwa.org to check if your membership is current.
I'm going to interrupt you really quickly.
Absolutely.
Because I forgot when you mentioned Marnie, it had me think where she's going to do a great interview with Anne Lamont and her husband, Neil Allen,
on the 13th of December.
On the 13th of December. So
yes,
that Marnie's going to do that interview with Anne. So if you're an Anne Lamont fan and her husband Alan, they're talking about better days. It's going to be great.
So you
that'll
go
be
on the
fantastic.
13th, and then the 14th is what Lisa's talking about. We're going to have two great events right behind each other. So go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, yes. Our 9th annual memoir showcase. It's going to be Thursday, December 14th at 7 p.m. at the Conrad Preeps Performing Arts Center. And just stay tuned for ticket information. And then finally, our last announcement. We now have a date for the San Diego Writers Festival for the 5th year. It's going to be April 6, 2024. So put that on your calendar. This is going to be our best year yet. We have some really exciting surprises in the works. And if you would like to be an exhibitor or submit to be a presenter, stay tuned. In the coming weeks, we will be advertising all the links to participate. So thanks everybody for watching. Thank you, Kyo. This has just been really inspiring.
Thank you, Leslie, for handling the behind the scenes, and Julie for getting us set up today. This was really wonderful, and I could talk with Kyo for a couple more hours, but we'll let her go. But thank you guys so much, and thank you for everyone watching the book club from wherever, from your screener at home. And we will have an announcement of a new book soon, so we'll figure out what's going to happen in January, February. But Kyo, thank you. Good luck with selling many more of these. Good luck with your promotion, and thank you for sharing time with us today.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.